All right. Good evening, LinkedIn. Hey, everybody. Dave Wilson of the Ringer Hire Show. And I know everybody's favorite, Miss Kylie Whitley. How you doing, Kylie?
Hi, guys.
She is back all the way from in Florida. She's in Florida. I'm in Pennsylvania. And tonight we got a special guest, Jason Risoli. He's in Ringo, New Jersey. How's it going, Jason?
I'm doing fantastic, Dave. Thanks for having me, guys.
Good. And we're going to be talking about, HR functions tonight. And please, anybody watching, ask questions. That's what we're here for tonight. But we'll be right back after this video. Now, Jason, you got to love that.
I do. No, every time I've watched this show for the past, 6-8 weeks. And every time I see that intro, I'm like, that's something else.
We need to make an HR video so that way you can put every word of HR. That might work out pretty good.
I like it.
We're going to say hello to some guests here tonight first. Now we're going to talk to you, Jason. Introduce yourself here. Let's see. We got Daryl. He's in Texas. How you doing, Daryl? He's a great connection. He's always on the show. Mr. Matt Looney. He is over in Matt. I know it's still Florida. Come on, I hope so. But we have a show tomorrow night on LinkedIn, series part 2. Rob over in Pittsburgh. Oh wow, Donna. Does anybody know Donna? Donna, I don't know where you're located at, so I hope everybody's going good there. Here's everybody's favorite, Mr. I'll let you read that. Jason.
Oh, me?
Oh, you're up.
Yeah. This is Mr. Kenny. You got to read it.
We all know that you're such a suave, debonair, sophisticated, stellar, scholarly, distinguished, dapper gentleman who is also intelligently, gorgeously handsome looking, and so impeccably well dressed too. Savor the flavor of the awesomeness in you.
Oh my goodness.
It even covers up on your face on that.
I love just saying that.
I know that's a mouthful, but it's fun.
I'll tell
a
you,
lot of compliments all rolled into one.
This show tonight, I was looking forward to because when Jason said he would come on, he's been in human resources for many years, and he knows Kylie. How long have you known each other?
I don't know, about 4 or 5 years, right? I'd say.
I think probably hindering more to the 5-6 year mark. When I started at Sears.
Yep. Oh, that's great. Okay. Donna says she's in Ohio. Okay, there we go. Jason, why don't you introduce yourself tonight? Because I've got a lot of great questions for you. I'm ready. And I know Kylie is. So, just introduce yourself, what you do and everything.
Yeah. So Jason Risoli, I've got probably 25 years almost in HR. I actually knew I wanted to be in HR when I was back in high school. My father was what they called a personnel manager. And I'm sure Dave Wilson, right off of saying that, is going to get some flashbacks and say, let's talk about it. That's where I really got my interest in HR, is watching him in a food distribution warehouse after school in high school. I said, I want to go to college for that. And I went to college and I got my master's in that and started in recruiting, in talent acquisition, now it's called, and then worked into labor and employment relations and worked then into, at a corporate role and then into field HR and worked my way up in field HR to an executive level. So, really enjoyed every step of the way. Never wanted to do something else. I always felt like this was me.
Well, you still got hair though.
Yeah. Luckily, I always say I don't care what color it is as long as it's there. So
That is awesome. I know Kylie wants to say something here. She's ready. I keep forgetting Kylie's able to use the controls here of everybody's comments. I'm like, how did that?
No, I'm good. I was skimming things.
Yeah.
It seems like people are having their own internal conversations here.
Yeah, I know. Oh, they're going to be in that all night.
Donna says that she knows Rob.
Okay, that's where they are, and everybody's saying savor the flavor, Mr.
Yeah,
Kennedy.
we're digging that comment apparently. Donna says she loves what we're doing.
I love it. I'm gonna start out with the first question, Jason.
Yeah.
And look at me, I'm already my body language. Here it goes.
Right.
All right. Hey, well,
gotta square up.
You know, I've been waiting for an HR for a long time because HR scares. I've said it over and over. HR scares the living hell out of me. Still to this day, I'm 57 and they still scare me, and I'm going to tell you why. So, no matter when you're called into HR, it's never to say, Dave, we're giving you a raise. Dave, you're doing such a great job. Dave, you're like your stomach. I don't care who you are. If you're not nervous when HR says they're coming in town, now they fly to you. Before they were there. Now they fly in. You're like, oh, geez, what did I do? What did I do wrong? Jason, answering to that, I think a lot of people can relate to that.
Yeah, no, I agree.
But
honestly, it's not HR's job to do that. It really, it's the manager's job to recognize and reward and their associates. I always said that it's when someone even called HR while I was at Sears, I try and revert the question back to the manager to answer because that employee manager relationship is truly important. So it shouldn't necessarily be HR's role to recognize and reward that individual. It should be the manager. So HR, someone in HR should know people on a personal relationship as best that they can, depending upon their scope. But it's definitely not that role. That's not the role that they're there to play.
But have you seen the difference in the 25 years you said? I'm going to take you back even the 90s and the 90s. It was totally different back then compared to now. Everything's evolved. But what do you think changes from the time, like from back in the 90s to now? Like why? I don't think they were involved as much. I didn't see it at least.
No.
Being in management like that. What like HR is today.
Yeah, HR has been centralized quite a bit. They were, a jack of all trades, and earlier on, but they were really there for that purpose. They really were, the role of the cupcakes and the birthday cards and the party planners way back in the day, and payroll if it wasn't within the finance org. That was the big role of HR back in the 90s when they were considered personnel. But now it's been very much centralized and have geared more towards an area where you have subject matter experts and then you have employee relations type of folks. And the employee relations typically is problem resolution, not recognition.
That makes sense. Kylie, I know you have some questions, Kylie. I know you're gonna there she goes.
Oh no, here we go.
I am not. What is this? I feel attacked. No, I'm actually leaning into kind of where we're at here with Rob is two parts is you said that's not the function of HR is to give those accolades to. So for you, where is that line drawn? What is the role? If you want to put it in layman's terms for people who don't really understand where the ball stops and starts inside of an HR department, what is the role? What is the responsibility?
So we're there to be facilitators, right? So I don't want to make it seem like HR doesn't recognize. We do from the standpoint of we help facilitate a process of recognition. We make sure that managers, we collect data, we look at data, we make sure that managers are recognizing their associates and doing well by their associates. Again, so we help facilitate that process. We're not directly doing it like it was done back in the 90s, like Jay.
You're facilitating it from the back end and then encouraging the managers to move forward with the action item.
Correct. Exactly correct.
See, I like that part. I mean, that's well said.
Rob is asking though, what if you can't trust the HR department? I think that's a really common misconception is that they need to be able to trust their HR and how that line, again, those lines are blurred. I think that's a lot of the problem is people don't necessarily understand it.
I agree because the perception is like Dave mentioned earlier in the call that, the only time you end up talking to HR directly is when there's a problem, probably. So even though behind the scenes, they might be facilitating a lot of benefits and good things within the company, directly when they're involved, most likely more times than not, it is something that is probably a disciplinary or some sort of coaching action that's taken place or a performance management type of action that's taken place. So it can make it seem like there's a level of distrust, but most likely when you look in the totality of what they're doing, which is that's not necessarily visible, they are out there to be an independent neutral. They really are supposed to be a neutral. Now, not every HR person might be a good person, right? They might not know how to separate that or lean towards the middle instead of leaning towards one end. So, Rob might have a point that his HR person maybe is not someone that they can trust. That's also why companies have certain rules in place that prevent HR from having personal relationships or familial relationships with others to ensure that there's that point of neutrality.
When you say that, you mean as far as like not even having any kind of friendly relationship with anybody outside of work? Are they putting those kinds of things in place?
No, I mean personal relationship. It's not, it's not that, obviously you can have your HR person, you can go out, you be in a bowling league together or whatever, and, go to the bar, whatever, but they have to maintain that neutrality. And if they can't, because they have a relationship that they feel might be, again, on more of a personal level, then they need to raise their hand and make sure that that's handled. That's if there's a situation like that occurs, that they're stepping out of it, right? Just like a manager would have to, if there was some sort of personal relationship, they'd have to step out of that.
Yeah, I think you need to change that.
Yep.
Yeah. And it comes down to educating. I think I learned I was friends, but I learned you had to, when I was younger in the military, even distance from leadership and your crew, because now you're their boss. And when you got too friendly, it backfired on me sometimes. Yep. It really did, because you think you have a friend and then they say something, it comes back to bite you. When you're in a meeting, let's just say with HR, the stuff to facilitate will come out. So that's why I've learned, I try to just keep it on a friendship level, like kind of like that, but not really outside. I've learned.
Yeah. It's hard because yes, you don't know, as you said, you're out at the bar having drinks and a conversation happens and you think that this is outside of work and then it gets brought into work. I think that line can be a little hairy too.
Yeah. So
Daryl says, my experience as a manager that HR stood in the way of promotions and raises. They fought raises and in my instance would not formulate policy and procedures to enable raises. Instead supported upper managers, wanted to keep payroll low.
It's an interesting point, but HR, one thing I'll point out, HR is not the keeper of the purse. They're the they're the processor of payroll, but they're not the keeper of the purse. That's the finance org's.
And I can advocate for that in every way. My hiring managers are the ones who make those decisions. HR has nothing to do with it. They have the budget in mind. They know what they are willing to allocate. And I typically am the one having those conversations, trying to get people raises or increases or getting involved in those decisions, not HR.
Yeah. So what HR does from that standpoint, they advise management on how best to spend their money when it comes to that. So it might come off like, and if someone has that knowledge of how they're influencing management or advising them, it might come off that they're trying to prevent it, but they're just, they're working with management on a budget and saying, how can we best distribute this budget based on the factors that we want to look at, whether it's certain KPIs, performance indicators, tenure, some certain performance reviews and so forth. So how best to support the workforce by spreading that money as far as it can go.
Jason, like I always like to tell people wherever I work, whatever I've done, I really believe in HR because you need that. You really need that person. And I always tell people, employees, they're afraid to go because they might be having a problem with somebody. I'm like, listen, that's what they're there for. Yeah, but I'm like, no, a good HR department, I feel, has to listen to that employee. At the end of the day, they make a decision, when it comes to management, and I understand that. But I don't think candidates or employees, don't be afraid to go to HR, because especially if it's a serious problem. I like how you said you facilitate it because you're going to give advice to management on top of it. But that, I think, is the trying to change a little bit. Even when I try to do it, is just go talk to them. If you don't trust anybody, talk. They have to listen.
True. I mean, at the end of the day, what's the alternative?
Right.
Either you're going to leave as an employee or you're going to escalate it to the point of, corporate warfare there,
or you're going to live in an environment that you're miserable in because you're not doing anything about it at all.
Correct.
And not all of them are, some of them are wrong. And I get that. And I think that's why when they go in there, then they come out, people start saying things. I'm always like, listen, when you go to HR, don't come out and say anything to anybody, please. Keep it to yourself. Keep it private. Keep it private because you need that.
And they might be able to talk to you and see if there's, again, is there someone might have this perception of their manager that there's something wrong going on, or and maybe that HR person has some insight that they can talk to and make the issue go away by telling them, no, it's really not that's not going to happen, or the way you see it is not really, the right way to look at it, or that's not the policy. They can maybe answer some of those and diffuse the situation before it gets escalated on a one-on-one with the associate.
I want to read this one to you because it's funny when Jason and I were deciding for him to come on to the show with us. This was part of the discussion that he and I had, was because I had made the comment that I felt like HR's loyalty was to the company.
That's what I was going to ask you. Yeah.
So Jason and I had a really long conversation about that, and it changed my perspective significantly. But Daryl, actually, it's what made me smile, just made a comment that sounds very similar to what I said to you before. HR isn't neutral in my experience. They're there to ensure the company stays within the bounds of legal requirements and ensure the company avoids legal liability. Their loyalty is to the company.
Yeah, I know what you said.
I just find it interesting because part of that I feel like is true. You're there to encourage them to stay within their legal requirements. Like, those statements I feel like are relatively accurate, but it's that last sentence, Jason, that I remember you being like, Kylie, come on, let's talk about it.
That's Daryl.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So it's a great point, and I agree with you 100%. I mean, before we jumped on the show here, I said HR is there to try and cross T's and dot I's. We try and our job is to help try and prevent a misstep. All right. Our job is to try and diffuse a situation, to make sure that if there is a situation where an employee and a manager are having an issue, that we can try and find middle ground, or possibly a reassignment if it's something that's serious. But we're trying to diffuse situations in order to, again, avoid liability, either way. So we look for win-wins.
I think the common thing is, though, people feel like you hit the nail on the head, right? So an employee's having an issue with a manager, and they go to HR, and there is that fear of what if they don't do anything?
Yeah.
And then I have to go back to my desk and sit with that same manager that it was already bad with. And I think, what would you say if somebody was to tell you, like, I'm just scared to go? Like, and for personal reasons, not because they think HR isn't effective but just scared. How would you?
Yeah, I mean, again, the HR person that has to have an established level of trust, right? Yeah. It's the biggest thing, even with me looking at, opportunities. The first thing I get asked is, well, what's the first thing you need to do? I said, I have to establish trust. I have to establish trust within management, and I have to establish trust within the employee population for my role. So, I don't want to, there's not a great answer to this, Kylie, besides that the person has to be able to trust their HR person to work with them and keep the conversation confidential to the extent that's feasible. And I know I'm putting a disclaimer on it, but that is the fact. It's not confidentiality at all times at any circumstance. It's to the extent that it's feasible. And sometimes that you can't resolve a situation or work on a situation that an employee says, hey, I'm telling you this, but I don't want you to tell anybody else about it, or I don't want you to do anything. Well, you just tied my hands, right? So fine, I'll be the listening ear to you, but we're not going to be able to work on this without trying to engage others, and work through it to the extent that it is confidential.
And Donna just said, I feel like some HR reps help the employees too, but there's a fine line. To your point.
Hey, there's my buddy Shuvik. I don't know if you remember Shuvik.
I remember the name.
Shuvik worked in India, HR India.
I'll let you read it.
Yes. Yes, we are loyal to the company, but employees are part of it. So we are loyal to them and help them as much as we can. And I agree.
I agree. I like that. I agree with that right there. It is. And have you seen the difference? Like, I know I always keep saying go back. So go back in the 90s and you come back now. And I looked on your thing about how you have to really know labor laws, and I get all that. Mm-hmm. This times of today are so different. Wow. Back then, because you didn't have cell phones then. You didn't have everything that we have here now, all the knowledge, because everybody seems to kind of Google everything and, you have it. But how do you stay up learning and training in that? Is it just continuous?
Well, I go back to earlier in the conversation that HR used to be a master of, a jack of all trades, and now it's more of a master of individual trades, with all the COE functions. And because it is extremely difficult to stay up on all the different laws, whether or not it's payroll laws or it's compliance HR laws or it's labor laws, it's recruiting and talent acquisition laws on the box and anything, and then the laws are different in every state, when it comes to all these different. So yeah, it is extremely difficult to stay up to date. I do try and as best I can stay informed through different, actually some law firms out there, that you can sign up for free, and they have you on the mailing list, and you get all the legal updates that are out there. Different associations, obviously SHRM is fantastic for some of things, right, something like that. Labor laws with the NLRB, the government, from a government perspective. So there's lots of different stuff that's out there and obviously networking, right? So LinkedIn and being on podcasts and listening to podcasts and shows like this and so forth are great ways to stay informed in your different HR expertise and areas.
Kylie, he's doing great. He's getting drilled here. He's like,
oh yeah, bring it.
I love it.
I've been doing it for a long time.
I love Matt. Matt says AI when you put that up. The AI will keep
you updated. Of course, why not?
Before people are going to say, they're going to type in, all right, I'm going to HR. What are some of the bullet points that I should say when I walk in the room? I mean, oh my God.
I mean, you know what? If the tool is there to utilize it.
Why not?
If it's something that will benefit you, then by all means.
You're right. I say the same thing. I mean, I joke around, but I use it I use it as a tool. But I guess everybody uses it for tools. I don't know how to say it.
That's what it is now.
Yeah,
it is.
People are using AI to completely do their resumes.
Work smart, not hard.
Correct. I couldn't agree more. Just if you have tools that are being put out to be at your disposal to do something that would take me an hour, takes this thing 10 minutes.
I know.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump on that real quick.
Jason, I always tell HR directors I have fun with them all the time because I like joking around and talking. And when they have a lot of issues, going back in the day to now, HR does a lot of stuff anymore. I always joke around and say they'll have talk about safety. Oh, just put it on HR. They'll do it.
Yeah.
Put it on HR. Oh yeah, you want them to cell phones? Just put it on HR. The HR is like going from, I don't know what it is, man. That's like, you better know everything, because I don't know, it just drives me crazy because there's so much involved in that one department.
It really is. And you really need to know the business that you support. I mean, as a recruiter, obviously you need to know the jobs that you're hiring for. You need to know what they do, how they do it, so you can look for those keywords when looking for those candidates that are going to be successful within the company. And from an HR perspective, you need to know how the business operates. You need to know what levers the executives are pulling, so that way you can best help guide them to where they need to go. So from a strategic standpoint, it's really, really important. It's really a lot nowadays.
Really a lot. So. Here she comes. Kylie's thinking.
That's one thing that AI isn't there yet. It's not there on predicting the future. So
yeah, right. Not yet. Right.
No, I was finding this.
Shouldn't conversations between employees and HR be confidential? Yes, like I said, to the extent that it's feasible, right?
Well, and I think that's the question: is where is that line?
Illegalities, sexual harassment typically is something that, obviously it's confidential, but you need to address it, right? You need to talk. You need to bring you have to have the accuser and the accusee. You have to have discussions. You can't just sweep it under the rug and let it stay. So there we go. So. Sexual harassment. I went to school HR with witnesses and written statements. School HR did nothing because the teacher was retiring that year. Well, again, that's something where kicking the can down the curb on certain things is not plausible. It's not advisable. There's things that, if it's someone that's a poor performer and they're 3 months away from retiring, do you really want to, performance manage them out and open up a can of worms and open up liability, knowing that they were going to retire, they might lose a pension? Yeah. That might be a situation to kick the can down the curb. When there's sexual harassment or there's some sort of illegality going on, you can't do that. And that's something that HR has to advise that and take action on. That this is not something that we should just kick the can down the curb on.
And I think right there is where you get the disconnect. I was waiting for a moment for that connection to happen, but I think that is where you get people saying, screw HR.
That's again going back. They lose trust.
She was so affected by that it is still something is fresh in her head. And she went to the people who, in our minds, as we're told, HR is there to support. They're there, and then in something so big, nothing was done because it was more convenient. And I'm saying from this perspective, it was more convenient for them to not open that can of worms. Well, something like that changed her probably for the rest of her life. And then she just posted again and says, and then I had to sit in class with him after that because it wasn't the end. Okay. So I think that's kind of where you have those moments where how do you tell people that trust HR? They are going to be there to support you. They are, there for both parties. And then have somebody tell a story like that and have the reaction immediately be, well, yeah, that makes sense. Because I think to anybody who's not in HR, it makes no sense. And she says, yes, ma'am.
Yep. and Donna, I'm not gonna at all try and downgrade what might have happened. But there might have been other ways to handle it. Again, there might have been a reassignment activity. Maybe it was something where it didn't elevate to the sexual harassment didn't elevate to the level that it was warranting of a dismissal of that teacher. Maybe, I don't know the circumstances and I don't want to open that can of worms.
No, I don't think that's necessary.
By any means, but there might have been some sort of coaching written, warning or some sort of formal discipline that took place on that teacher that
she wasn't aware
that the college thought that was appropriate. So, again, I don't know the circumstances, but there should have been, and those aren't always shared with the accuser, the accuser, so again, someone brings forth something that, someone did this to me. It kind of sucks, and I hope I can say that on this, but you're not always told what happens, right? You're not always told, well, that person got a final warning, or that person, is going to get a 1 week unpaid suspension. You're not going to get told that. And so they don't have that level of closure because of the confidentiality that sometimes occurs. So sexual harassment is a very, very tough subject.
It scares the living hell out of me. As soon as somebody comes up, I tell people from experience, I tell them, stop. Okay, listen, that's great. But right there is where I take it right to HR because I think you have to, because I don't want to give the wrong advice. Because there's two stories there. So I always just say to anybody in my experience, I just say, listen to them, write it down, have them write a statement, and then they can bring it into their HR department because again, that confidentiality, I don't want to, it's none of my business. It is when they confront it, but when we bring it to HR, then that's where I just listen to the HR department, what the outcome was.
Yeah. David, Matt is speaking to your point here. He's saying HR is for both sides. And if there's an issue, don't wait until you're in trouble to bring that to the attention. At that point, it's too late. That's
what I'm talking about there. That's where I feel that I love it. Listen, I always joke around it, but I really think an HR is there for the people too. A good HR person. Jason, I'm sure open communication. You would like that, right? In HR?
Yeah, and I agree, and I think that's where you go back to that HR becomes more and more involved nowadays because people aren't able to have conversations that involve conflict. It goes back to some of the human traits of now. What do people do? They pick up a text. They don't even want to make phone calls anymore. They text each other because they that personal interaction. They're afraid to have anything that could be perceived as conflict. So what do? They kick it to HR. And to handle it, it's like, it's a lot of this stuff, and that escalates it, unfortunately, because then you're bringing in a third party into this that might have just been able to get handled with a conversation over a cup of coffee and say, hey, I disagree with you, and here's my points. Okay, I hear what you're saying, and and this is how we have to work on this. That's as simple as a manager and a subordinate conversation might have to be. But because people don't understand or feel comfortable in having conversations with conflict, that the potential perceived conflict, they go to HR and it escalates a lot of stuff.
No, that makes sense.
Donna says everyone wants it in writing. Do you think that maybe that inability or desire to no longer have that conflict? Yes, I agree. I think that this is a generation where we write things and that's
Yeah.
it. But do you think that a part of that also started because people were getting more sensitive?
Yeah.
And so if you tried having that conversation, then somebody was going to HR and saying that you belittled them or berated them, and then it's their word against yours for something where you were just trying to find resolution without HR.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, let's throw it back in the talent acquisition space. Whoever heard of ghosting 10 years ago?
No, you didn't hear those words.
I'm convinced that came from the digital dating thing.
Yeah,
I have no clue.
Because ghosting simply is a person not feeling comfortable saying to the other person, "I'm not interested."
Right.
So they ghost them. I mean, it goes back to conflict, not being able to handle a conversation that involves conflict. So you get ghosted.
Right.
Same thing why
like
people
how you
just
said
job
that
abandon. Yeah.
Right there, conflict.
Yeah,
I
job
like that
abandonment's the same way. People job abandon now because they can't tell their boss even, I'm quitting and here's my reasons why. So they just job abandon instead because they don't want to have that conversation. So
wasn't there a movement for that? Was it called silent quitting?
Silent quitting, yeah.
Is that what that? Okay.
Is that what? I tell you, when I was in, I keep saying the 90s. I don't know why. I'm still stuck there. But when I was in a union environment as a manager out of the military, and I was at the paper industry, and it was tough. You really had to have those rules, and you had a good HR department because it was always fighting. They were always fighting back and forth. So when I got out of the union, I always thought, yeah, I'm going to do this. I can do this. You know what? You can't. Because when you go back into a place that's non-union, you won't have any workers if you say, I'm going to fire everybody. Oh, I'm going to do this. You gotta, it's the same concept. It's just you got to follow the rules. I think a lot of the times we need to follow the rules, and the problems won't be there as much.
True. No, true. I mean, that's
Quite
the one benefit of I don't want to even digress into a labor relations conversation, which I could do obviously if we want to do it another show, David. But at least in a union environment, everything's black and white for the most part.
Yeah.
You have a labor contract, so everything is right there and it's black and white. A lot of times employees with company policies, the policies are out there, but a lot of times employees don't even know where the policies are or where to find them. So they might not know what the policy is when it comes to, is the manager following it or is that policy being broken?
Right.
So again, when HR is, someone goes to HR and says, well, I feel like the manager's doing this and we're the ones that say, well, here is the policy that they're entitled to do that. We look like a bad guy, but we're just in essence reiterating what you just said, what's in black and white.
Right.
It's just that it's a communication issue that the employee's unaware of what the policies are.
Yeah.
Which to an extent is the fault of the employee, right? If you're going to be somewhere, you should know what those policies are, especially if you're going to choose to go and complain about them. Know what you're talking about beforehand. And it's quiet quitting.
Oh, quiet quitting.
There he is, Alan. Yeah, Alan's like quiet quitting.
Yeah.
Thanks, Alan.
I agree with you to some extent, Kylie, because I mean, certain companies don't do a good job at communicating what policies are, at all. Usually the bigger companies are because they're the policies are located on a website, they're hidden, there's different policies for different areas.
I think that's what I'm asking.
So Sears was actually not really good at doing that because
they were awful.
I didn't want to say they were awful, but they were not really good at doing that.
I mean, there's other ones in place were great, but telling their employees what they were, if you weren't willing to go and look for it, you weren't going to know.
Correct. But then there's companies where I agree with you 100%. There's an employee handbook. The employee was given the employee handbook. They signed off on the employee handbook. They should have known everything that was in the employee handbook. They should have just read. So in that standpoint, I agree with you 100%. But I think more times than not, companies don't have employee handbooks and or ones that are easily accessible to associates, and it's not on the associates, really on the company for failing to communicate that appropriately.
So I wasn't actually making the statement; I was more asking the question.
Okay.
If you
well, then I agree with you.
When Kylie grabs her hair and starts twirling it like,
oh no, that's not what I meant.
Push the hand here, hand here,
where I start sinking.
Yeah, she'll start going like this, grab her ear, just ignore that.
You stop. No, but I was more asking, do you feel like it falls to the employee that if they are not being given that information freely, that they need to go and find it? Or you already answered it kind of, though, that really does fall to the company and they're failing.
That's part of HR's job, is if they don't know a policy, they should go ask HR what that policy is. They shouldn't necessarily start with, they just like if there's a benefits policy, hey, where can I find this? Hey, where can I find that? They can, maybe they can go to they feel confident going to their boss, where can I find the benefits information? Sure. Go to your boss for that. But where can I find this issue? The policy on sexual harassment. Yeah, they might want to go to HR on that one, not their boss. So
Daryl.
Okay, Dave.
I have had conflict users get what the subordinate wanted. Lesson learned. Either they accept the assignment or they can discuss with HR about why they don't believe they should do the assignment. A lot of it, it reminds me of like school. Sometimes with HR and the workforce, it seems it's always like that's what I feel like. You're in school and you need to tell the rules and regulations, and that's what it sounds like here. If you don't believe it, I don't know. It to me, it's just a subject of wow, both sides. Because if you don't put out the right information, they don't know, like you both were talking about.
Yep. Insubordination is one that comes up also all the time. What is perceived as insubordination versus lollygagging versus, an employee, legitimate concerns. Is it something where the manager feels like, hey, again, I'm the, this is the military. You do as I say, not as I do. It's goes to the level of respect. They're being insubordinate because they don't respect me. Then it turns into they're being insubordinate, or I'm not doing what he says because he's discriminating again. So again, it just blows up in all these different areas. So it gets kicked to HR often.
Wow. Makes sense. Rob, I don't know if this is a question or a statement. I see a question mark, but it reads like a statement. But Rob says on pre-screened interviews, now they ask you, what is your ideal manager or supervisor? I personally have not come across that. I have not. I have had questions about what you were looking for, but I haven't had the specificity of saying like, what is your ideal manager or supervisor? I have not been asked that in an interview. And I personally have not been asked by any prior employers or current to pose that question during an interview either.
Rob, I like the rules. Give me the rules. I'll take the rules. It makes it a hell of a lot easier. You follow the rules, you don't have any problems.
So we did actually at Sears. We did assessments with candidates, and then also when they started for the ones that didn't, because it wasn't required. And one of the things that we did with these assessments was to match up and understand what would be the ideal manager or way to manage this associate based on their personality traits. So it's not that we would make a hiring decision necessarily based on it, but it gave us some insight into what is the best way to manage that individual that might be getting hired by the company. So that is something that we definitely did.
That makes sense.
You're talking about almost those personality type assessments, right? With the, almost never. Yeah, but it really does. I've worked in a few places. By the time I started with Sears, they were no longer using them. But at IOA, I had to use numerous assessments, and that was one of them. And no, it was not. I liked them. It was not a hiring decision, but as Jason just mentioned, it was incredibly beneficial to the point of figuring out who they were and what roles they would fit best in and what teams they would fit best on.
Yep.
So I did find it to be helpful.
Jason, do you like those? You've seen them evolve also. I didn't have them back a long time ago, but when they come out, wow. Naturally, when you take them, you always say, oh my God, how do they learn from you?
Well, there's definitely companies that use them to, obviously like Google and Facebook Meta and Amazon. Right. They use stuff, they definitely use stuff like that. To the extent that it's statistically accurate and it shows it's proven, I agree with them. However, it takes a while to prove them out. So because you're proving them, a lot of these companies are come in that prove it. It's proven based on other companies' performance. So you have to implement something for a good 6 months to a year before you really can understand if the data is proving out that it's correct. So again, I would always look to implement that on a voluntary basis. Where it's not being used as a benchmark for hiring, a qualifying point for hiring. But I do think that they do show, if you can make that correlation of personality to performance, then it's it's a dead giveaway. Use it.
Well, and can you use that as an optional if you're asking a candidate to do it in the interview process? Don't you have to have everybody do it for legal reasons?
No, if you're not using it as a hiring criteria, if you're not making a hiring decision based on it, you can do it as voluntary. What we were doing at Sears is we would do it as voluntary up front. And then if someone was hired, then we would make it mandatory upon their hiring. So
Okay,
that way,
that
at least
makes
we
sense.
can
We
get
still have it on
everybody.
file.
We'd have more statistics, and then we'd have, what was really interesting now is we had at certain times we'd have a person take it twice, 3 weeks apart, and it showed different scores. So then you go questioning, well, what's going on here?
Were you giving the answers you thought that we would want to hear?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So how could it be 3 weeks apart? How could it be statistically, completely different, in their scoring match? So
I think oftentimes in those, people are not honest. It is very much like, well, I'm not going to say that I get angry about little things. Like that doesn't seem like a good idea.
You go to YouTube and you can get all the kind of stuff you want. You're like, wow, I didn't think about that. But YouTube is only as good as who's putting that information on there too. So there's so many different things on that. I like them and I don't. I go back and forth on it. I like the idea that it's optional, like for not hiring. Yeah. I kind of like that volunteer, because I would like to see what I do. But then everybody always says, oh, they're doing it for a reason. They're doing it because they don't like you. And I don't. It's just people hearsay constantly.
Yeah, I think it's company dependent in every way. Yeah. I think that you have companies that say that they're not using it for hiring or to make a hiring decision, but they are. And then I think that you have situations like the Sears, which I love having that on file. I think even if you wanted to do those once a year, just to see how people are growing and changing, so you can continue to grow and change with them as far as, their placement in the company. I think that there's a lot of value to it. But I don't necessarily agree with it being used as a hiring tool.
Completely.
I think we all should take one. I think we should all come to an agreement. All three of us will take one. Right. And then we're going to come on the show and then we're going to discuss. We're going to be like, all right, does this sound like me? Does this sound like you?
I probably can get us some free ones. So
yeah, right. Daryl says quiet quitting is caused by employee apathy. Yep, the feeling they have no say and are not listened to. Yeah,
I don't know that I agree with that.
Here we go, Rob.
There's different reasons why people quiet quit.
Yeah.
So right. I think that maybe, Daryl, you might not be wrong that there are people who do it for that reason, but I also just think that there are people who would prefer not to deal with the problem at hand.
Yeah.
Rob says, does a test show more detail about a person than a face-to-face interview? Yeah, I think so. You can only learn so much. A face-to-face interview, that time with somebody, especially someone who interviews well. They know what they're saying. They know how to conduct themselves. I think having those tests, they ask you the same questions in different sentence structure multiple times to like catch true answers. So yeah, Rob, I would say that you get more detail from it.
Well, you have also objectivity versus subjectivity, when you do that. A test usually gives you objective answers and more specific answers, whereas a face-to-face interview, a person could be more subjective on that hiring decision, which also opens them up for potential liability. You have the horn effect. You have different effects based on the interviewer. They might gear towards a certain type of person that they want, an A-type personality, or someone who, versus a test is indiscriminate when it comes to stuff like that. It's objective.
Donna says, hate those tests.
I know, because you don't know how to answer.
Donna.
There's only one way to answer those tests, honestly, truthfully.
Yeah.
It is. Sometimes it's right, though. You know. Sometimes it's right. When you read it, you're like, that is me. Yeah. So I'm like, all right, that is me on some of it. I'm like, damn.
Oh, I've read mine after I've ended up employed with places that I had to take it. And then I'll go in and pull up my results. I'm like, all right, well, it seems pretty accurate, actually.
It's like reading the horoscopes. Everything could be used.
Yeah,
we got about two more.
I guess that's fair.
Got about two more questions for you. This one we talked about right prior to the show about at will, and I get asked this question a lot too. At will, Pennsylvania, we're in a state that's at will. I don't know if Florida is or not. Kylie, do you know if it is at will? Jason, in your terms, what does at will mean to you, and how do you explain what at will if somebody was to come up and ask you?
Well, the legal term where someone could be discharged for any reason whatsoever, as long as it's not discriminatory or in violation of the law. So that's the legal answer in a summary. But what it means to me is that it's really about flexibility. It's the flexibility of the employer to take an expedited action on somebody without having to go through a certain due process, right? Mm-hmm. Certain times that might be warranted. In certain situations that might be necessary. And for certain types of companies, that is the best approach, right?
Right.
But at will is only to the extent where there's not a conflict within the company. So you have the legal aspect of at will, but then you also have company policies, you have practices, you have precedents that have been set within a company that conflict with at will. So again, the law in the state of Florida might be you're at will. Your job offer might say you're at will, but that doesn't give the company the ability to bypass their own policies that are in place.
That's what I wanted to say.
That are in place to discharge somebody without due process or without following their own policies. So I think it's a good thing that it gives companies flexibility to set their businesses up as they deem necessary. And I do think it is definitely beneficial to small employers, small businesses, but for larger corporations, they typically have processes and policies in place that afford that due process and afford that to avoid an at-will situation where someone could be discharged without going through that process or in violation of their own policy.
I think that's just what I found to be so interesting when we were talking before we actually went live was I was unaware, and even being in an HR environment, I was unaware that in an at-will state, company policy would supersede the state law. I didn't know that. And I'm guessing if I didn't, there's probably quite a few people who didn't. So I think that's really valuable information.
Yeah. I mean, so does it violate the law of the state or federally or whatever? No, but does it open the company to severe liability for that associate if they gave everybody else that due process under the company policy, not you?
Right.
That is opening them up for liability. And that, again, is where HR would come in and say, well, I know it's at will, right? The law is at will, but we have this policy. Everybody that has a performance deficiency is given a 90-day process. This person is not being given that process. And if you bypass that process, it is at will, but you're opening up yourself for liability by doing this. And
I'm the only one that probably likes the PIP.
On behalf of the associate, to say, don't do this probably, but it's ultimately the owners or the leadership's decision.
I love the PIP program, like a PIP. I like that. Yeah. I had that on me. And at first I didn't like it because naturally you're like, you're not in trouble. A good PIP is going to give you, they wrote out everything you need to do within the month. And then they followed up with you after that month. And if you did everything, it was meant to teach you and learn. And it actually kind of gets you to focus and get back into the game. You're not an enemy. They're giving you an opportunity there. And that's what I like.
We always we always used to say it's a performance plan for improvement or a performance improvement plan, not a performance plan for failure.
I never heard it that way.
Sears, it was a PIP, a performance improvement plan.
I just know PIP. That's all. When I was put on it, I was like, what is that?
I was very fortunate not to be on one, but I was around a few interactions where those were in place.
I think it's great. I think it's a great way to get the message. Maybe you are like, I was on a path to where I knew I was wrong sometimes, and I admit it, I know, but my boss came in and they set me on the right path and then turned me around and everything was fine. Never heard anything else about it. They gave you the chance,
the tools and the chance to fix it. And at that point, if you hadn't, that was on you.
Correct.
Because the training comes down to a lot of it. Like when you're talking about that, Jason, they need to educate the employees. I really believe, because if you don't know, it's not your fault. You need to know. Like, I've never heard of really that many people saying I was just let go at will. Everybody really knows what they're probably let go for. Yeah. But listen, I don't know. I don't know if it's happened to people. Maybe years ago it did. That I was just let go for what? I don't know. That's kind of hard to believe, but maybe.
Yeah. I mean, the only time you got let go, for something like that is again, if it's something where it's a job elimination, but again, anyone that's let go, they most likely know what caused it, or honestly, the manager should have made sure that they were told, because that would also head off any potential liability, is to be able to explain to the associate, we're letting you go and it was for this deficiency or for this reason, and that would hopefully head off the unknown of why.
Kylie, I know you got another question here, and then I have one more. I know you have one.
I always have questions.
I know. I'm watching. She's ready.
Well, funny. I actually have a desire to go backwards for a second because Rob was talking about the test and he says they're timed. And this was one of the things that I had to drive home with candidates when I was doing this on a regular basis. Rob, they are timed, but you are only judged by what you answer. You are not judged by anything that you don't complete. So the time actually means nothing. And the recruiter or hiring manager should be telling you those things beforehand.
And usually there's scientific data behind where they can where these tests can tell if someone just marked 3 straight down, or
it will actually invalidate
or
the
put
test.
1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. Like they can tell.
It comes up to the recruiter or talent acquisition with a disclaimer at the bottom that says, like, this is flagged. We don't believe that this was like a truly done test. Yeah.
Correct.
And Donna says, I'm glad that my current employer took 1 interview to hire me. No test either, just the STAR method. Donna, I am such a strong advocate for just making the decision. Yeah. If you like the person, if you have that, you know it, you don't need to wait around for it. I think maybe a second interview is completely acceptable, but I have been in companies where it's 4 or 5 weeks of interviews and numerous panels, and they're waiting. And their stance would be, well, if they really want it, then I'm like, no.
Wait, I know. That's
not how this works. Yeah. If you really want them, you'll act on it. They're entitled to have that as a candidate, to have that same feeling. So Donna, that caught me immediately. And she says, great show tonight. You're all very intelligent, and I can tell you have great integrity.
Oh, thank you, Donna.
That was really nice.
Very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, that's what I do. And Kenny, Kenny never took. Kenny, what's he say?
Never took any test.
Kenny, that is impossible. 35. He's been at 35.5 years. I think. Come back up. I didn't really, in his profession that he would. My question, Jason, last one here, and then we'll wrap it up. Because this will be another great show. I can tell. We didn't even hit my book. I worked on it. Look at all my books, Jason. Human Resources for Dummy.
Anytime you want me to come back.
Yeah.
Well, we all have to take the tests. So.
Yes,
that's right. And the reason I do this, and the reason I read these things, and is everything, because I really believe it comes down to, I've learned, it's just the communication and with HR and the employees of educating them to make sure, like, I know what to do when something happens. Mm-hmm. If they've told you 3 or 4 times and then you did it the wrong way, that's on you, but I like when HR tells you what has to be done, because then it's like, hey, I'm following what we're saying, what we're doing.
Yep.
But I still feel that leadership, and Kylie, we've talked about this before, I still feel that leadership needs to be trained somewhat, I think, in HR functions a little bit, because I think they can cut off a lot of the problems. Some of the stuff that doesn't have to go to HR, because like you said before, you should have to trust your supervisor. If I can't go to Jason or Kylie, then I got to go to Jason around without chain of command, if you want to call it, that's what I'm used to. I think that's where the disconnect is, that trust. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I mean, that's why I love what I do, is because it's really just people and relationships. It's being able to, facilitate a discussion, and again, establishing trust and being able to have frank communication with an associate, whether it's a peer, a boss, or a subordinate, on what problem or where they're going, setting goals, being able to, talk and give feedback 2 ways, upward and sideways and downward. It's just really about fostering relationships.
Yeah.
And yes, from an HR perspective, it's making sure that leader or that manager is able to understand what expectations that employee might have of them, so it's like my grandmother used to tell me, put yourself in their shoes, right? How would you want to be treated? That's the number one philosophy that I have from a leadership perspective, is the golden rule. Treat others as you wish to be treated. And I think that so many leaders would be better leaders if they had that in their mind when they entered that conversation with an associate, is how would you want to be talked to? How would you want to be treated if you were in that situation where your performance was under par, or if you had to be told, you can't take that week off for vacation. So again, just live by the golden rule, people, and that will solve so many things when it comes to this.
That's awesome.
Daryl says, I use HR as a resource in questions I didn't have clear answers to. I referred subordinates to HR for purposes of retention and accommodations.
That's a tough one. I mean, that accommodations is, you got to be careful. You really got to listen. I mean,
yeah. No, there's definitely areas where there's a lot of legal things, and the last thing a manager wants to do is give someone an answer that's wrong. So I always call it the HR answer. I'm not sure, but let me get back to you on it, and make sure make sure you follow up promptly, because guess what? Someone doesn't expect HR or the manager to have every answer to every law that's out there. Right. But they do expect you to get them the answer in a timely fashion. Okay. So, I always call it the HR answer. I'm not sure, but let me get back to you. All right. And that establishes trust.
Rob, thank you for another awesome show. Thanks. Appreciate it, Rob. On my part, Jason, I want to thank you on my part. I want to thank you for coming on. I'll tell you what you've done. You sat there. It's almost an hour. You drilled that in there an hour, and
a lot more in me, bud.
Yeah. And I think it was a good show. It was just showing you like that you're real. I always look at HR as real.
You humanize it.
They humanize it, yeah. And there's a lot I hope somebody learned from tonight, even if it's a couple people that were on here that learned something. And I always do. So, but I got to give you credit. You were the first one in 3 years that I had to show that I could to come on the show. And Kylie, thank you for that, because I wouldn't have known.
The minute he said HR, I was like, oh, I've got the perfect guy. Like,
he's got it.
Don't you worry, I'll reach out.
That's right. And Kylie, if you want to end it up tonight, I'm sure you have something you could end it here with.
No, I'm just so pleased with all of Daryl just says thank you.
New Jersey, Ken. New Jersey boy.
Jersey Ken.
He has to sound like a New Yorker. So no, New Jersey boy through and through.
Jersey boy.
Daryl says, thanks for the wonderful discussion. Yeah, he says you sound like a New Yorker. That's funny.
Jason sounds like a New Yorker. That's Kenny. He's awesome.
Close enough. No, I'm just really grateful. I love being able to do all of these things with you guys. And it just seems like the more we get into these topics, the more people are getting engaged with it. And I love it goes back to what we talked about at the very beginning with you and I, David, this becomes that roundtable mentality. Like everybody's getting involved. We're the three that are sitting here on camera, but everybody is getting involved in these discussions. And I love being able to be a part of that kind of community.
I love it. So I know Carla will be coming up with another topic for Wednesdays, but Jason, we definitely want to have you back on. I'm looking forward to it.
I would simply love that.
Especially on recruiting and even leadership. We want to talk about. There's a lot of different topics that you can talk about, and there's some that are good. So
who else I want to get on here if we're talking about recruiting is Veronica Downey.
Oh, Veronica's great.
That would be a good one. She was the director of talent acquisition at Sears for the end of my time there. She's fantastic. One of the biggest hearts, most intelligent, just enjoyable humans. And I'm sure she would love to do it. She's great with this kind of stuff too. So this would be a fun group to do something like that. Send her a personality test too, and we'll bring her in.
There we go.
And I'll see if I can get you guys in touch with the company that we were using and let it explore some there for you.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll be talking to you both right after this video. So good night, everyone. Thank you for being on the show.
Good night, guys.
Yeah. Thank you.